up, guys? We are back with the Casual Combat MMA podcast, and today we have not a fighter interview, but definitely an interview with someone who is close to myself, close with our co-host Cal, who is not here today, and that is Austin Schoen. What's up, Austin? How you doing this week?
What's up, dude? How are you? I'm doing great.
Dude, I can't complain. We just had homecoming week at the high school that I teach at, so it's been chaotic going back to school on Monday after homecoming week. I chaperoned the homecoming dance last night, so it'll be kind of like a return to reality. But I have a very short week upcoming because I'm traveling down to you in Arizona because you're getting married this weekend. So
yes, I am. Should be a good time.
So I'm excited. Obviously, we're recording this pre next weekend. Even though we will see each other, there will be absolutely no time to do any of this garbage. So I'm excited. Not only will I get to see you, I'll get to see a whole bunch of college buddies. A friend of the podcast, Trey Sengelkis, is down there. I'll see him a little bit. So looking forward to it.
Hell yeah. Dude, it'll be fun.
Be very fun. All right. So as per usual, I see you've already got your beer there. What are you drinking today in our traditional beer review?
I'm doing an homage to where me and Nelson became good friends, La Crosse, Wisconsin. This weekend is their Oktoberfest. My brother actually went back to La Crosse to go to Oktoberfest. That's the only reason why I know. But in commemoration, I went and got a 28-pack for this weekend so that people can all drink the taste of La Crosse, Wisconsin. Samuel Adams Oktoberfest.
Very nice. Dude, I miss a good Oktoberfest beer. I don't think I've had one since I've been out of La Crosse, but we're trying to make plans to go next year. So if you want it on that, you let me know. But this week, I am trying this Golden Monkey. It'll be reversed on the camera, but it's called a triple ale, and it's 9.5% alcohol. So I don't think I'm going to like it, but.
Do you still have those from your wedding? Because I'm pretty sure I had that at your wedding.
Yes, it's from my wedding, yeah.
Okay.
It's not that bad. Tastes a little bit like banana.
Yeah?
I probably won't be having a second one, but it tastes good.
All right. It's rich.
Yeah. So all beers aside, let's talk about your unique role in MMA. All right. So for the listeners who don't know us personally, Austin and I went to college. We were on the same college wrestling team, knew each other previous to college, but like he alluded to earlier, we really got to know each other in college. And since then, Austin has become a doctor of chiropractic. He also owns his own practice called Warrior Sports Wellness. He also has his own podcast and business with our good friend Alex Friedman that is called the Building a Fighter podcast, which I will link all of his stuff down in the description of all the podcasts and everything. And on top of that, you're also an MMA coach. Tell us a little bit about what you do as far as your involvement with the sport.
Sure. So like you alluded to, we met in college wrestling. I've wrestled since I was 6. That's kind of helped me get into the little niche that I am in right now, where I tell people that I'm a performance therapist, right? So I'm a doctor of chiropractic, like Nelson said. I also have a master's in sports medicine. So I kind of like fit into that niche of sports chiropractic, if you will. And then I also do strength and conditioning. That's what I went to undergrad for. And that's kind of what I've carved myself out, where my practice is about 50% healthcare, 50% strength and conditioning, trying to combine it all into one-stop shop for elite athletes, and particularly elite combat sports athletes. Going from that, I also help over at, so I'm down in Scottsdale, Arizona. There's a relatively big gym called Fight Ready MMA. We're known for the home to Henry Cejudo. That's typically what we're known for, but I do help out as a wrestling coach over there for the pro team, and help those guys about 2 to 3 days a week, just whether it be on sparring days on the healthcare side, or whether it be actual coaching. I do go and corner some of the athletes as well.
That is super cool. We've seen you most recently on ESPN Plus cornering Luis Saldana. Am I saying it right?
Saldana, yep.
Saldana, super fun fighter to watch. Last time didn't go his way, but that will have absolutely no contingency on whatever. If I tune in to watch his fights, I always get excited when he fights. He always goes out there and lets it fly. But talk to us a little bit too about on this podcast, right? It's the Casual Combat Podcast. Cal and I are pretty maxed out in our understanding of the UFC, but you always get on me about really not highlighting other promotions. So for the people that watch this podcast, it's mostly gauged at getting people into MMA. What would an MMA fan gain by going and seeking out some of these other promotions, especially if it's hard if they don't know many of the people on the fight cards.
For sure. The best thing I can say is if you do get like a UFC Fight Pass, that kind of scenario where there's a lot of different regional promotions you have access to, it allows you to get ahead of the curve, right? That's where you start to see Sean O'Malley kind of bloom into himself on LFA. That's where you see Paddy Pimblett on Cage Warriors going off. He built a huge fan base before he actually got into the UFC. That's where you see those guys that aren't just good when they get to the UFC. You get to see them blossom. You get to see them go from almost like child to adult in the eyes of their combat sports career. So it's cool because you get to see that. But then you also, if you are not just a fan of the sport, but a student of the sport, that's where you get to see the glaring technical deficiencies and or the glaring stylistic matchups. Because typically on the regional scene, that's going to be where you have a extreme specialist, like somebody who's just really good at wrestling. And you get to see how he matches up again against maybe an extreme striker, where it's a dense stylistic matchup. Which one's going to win? Does this one guy have the takedown defense to stop the wrestler coming at them? And then you can build from there. As a young coach in the sport, that's helped me tremendously because I'm able to see the mistakes that these young guys are making that I might have coached. In all honesty, I might have said those cues in the corner. And seeing things play out in a regional setting is a little bit safer for the fighter's career. If you get a loss on the regional scene, it's not as bad as going 1-1 and then going 1-2 in the UFC.
Yeah.
But also it allows you to kind of pick up on, like I said, all these differences in athlete and pick up on, do tall athletes do well against short athletes, stuff like that.
Yeah, that's super insightful. And since you've critiqued me on only covering the UFC, I've been starting to watch more things. Usually I tune in to the more regional circuits when I know somebody fighting, right? Whether it be somebody that I've wrestled with or somebody, that I follow on Instagram or something like that. But like you said, the specialists and the range of types of fighters that you see, it almost reminds me of the early days of the UFC. You know what I mean? Yep. When the fighters are super, super skilled, but maybe not as well-rounded and as well polished as the guys you're seeing on ESPN Plus. And that's for good reason, right? ESPN Plus is, the place where maybe, guys get after they've had 13, 14 fights. Whereas you can kind of find those diamonds in the rough at some of those other promotions and then follow their stories, which I think is really cool.
For sure. Like a cool example is Josh De Silveira, I believe his name is. He's a buddy of a couple of my fighters. His dad is actually one of the head coaches at American Top Team. But you watching the LFA circuit, I think he's 3-0 in the LFA, seeing his striking from his first fight all the way till he just got that light heavyweight title. And just watching those 3 fights, it's cool to see the evolution and how fast somebody can progress that one dimension of their skills that were lacking behind. Because the dude wrestled at Arizona State, and his dad, obviously being Conan Silveira, is like a very accomplished grappler. So Josh had all of that, but seeing him go from 1-0 as a pro to 5-0 as a pro and having a light heavyweight strap, it's cool to see the progression that also your athletes can make if you do the right things.
That's neat. And especially, you're starting to see athletes now that have almost a generation into this sport, which is super cool, right? Having a father that understands the sport and is involved. Whereas I feel like in the past, it's been many people like, I'm the first guy fighting, from my state, from my town, from my family. Now you're starting to see almost these generational fighters, which is really cool.
Yep. Oh yeah. Also pause. I keep forgetting that I'm on video because our podcast is only audio. So I keep catching myself with a cockeyed neck, stuff like this.
That's all right. I think the majority of our listeners listen to the podcast anyway. I just to acknowledge this too. My dog ate my chair. That's stationary. So I just have this swivel chair and I keep catching myself moving in the frame too. So this is just the start of season 2. We're getting back into the swing of things. I think our listeners will take it easy on us. So what I really want to pick your brain on during this episode, which when we have fighters on, right, we're really talking about their training. We're talking about their mindset. We're talking about different things. And I think you present a unique conversation point of, not that fighters can't answer this, but why would you ask a fighter these questions? What does a fighter, or what does the background leading up to a fight look like from a team member of a fighter? I know you're involved in many of your fighters, not only fighting careers, but also their chiropractic care, their strength and conditioning, things like that. From a behind the scenes look, what all does it take to get into that octagon that most people don't see?
For sure. I think it varies tremendously from fighter to fighter, right? Some fighters want a very hands-on approach for their team. Think about like a Brian Ortega, where he built an entire team around him, versus some fighters want to be a part of a team. Think about like everybody at City Kickboxing with like Izzy and Volk. While those are individualized camps, they want that team atmosphere around them. What I typically see works well for my athletes is once all the coaches get on the same page. So at Fight Ready, we have 4 main coaches. We got Angel Cejudo, he's a wrestling coach, Henry's brother. Santino DeFranco is our head coach. Eddie Cha is our head striking coach. Then Alan Veers is our boxing coach. Once we figure out what everybody's role is in that one particular athlete's camp, then we bring in me or whoever they're working with the strength and conditioning. So that could be Chad Ike, another great strength coach at Fight Ready. As well as some of our guys use Neuroforce or whoever it may be. We sit everybody down in one area with the athlete there, and we try to hammer out their schedule, because the biggest thing is we want to make sure that these athletes don't overtrain. That's something as well as I do. Like especially if you come from the wrestler mindset, which most of our gym does, you just want to put your head down, grind it out. You're going to grind out a win, right? That's the typical mindset of a wrestler in particular going into MMA. But we know with different science and different recovery modalities that we can actually schedule different things in the week that are going to decrease your neural load. So it's not going to overload your CNS. You're going to recover faster. We can stagger out our practices from a grappling to striking basis, to where typically grappling is going to be our higher load actual practices, versus striking is going to be a little bit more technical, and pairing those up together in the same day gives a great neural input that isn't going to lead to overtraining. And then also figuring out where sparring goes into the mix. Some athletes only like to do sparring like 1 day a week. Some athletes, like I've heard, spar 3 days a week, which I personally think is extremely excessive. That let's save the brain trauma for the sport that you have to do. But it's finding what that athlete wants, understanding that what they want and what they need don't necessarily always match up, and then having an open and honest communication between every person on their support staff. So coaches, therapists, strength and conditioning coaches, dietitians, sports psych. Like I actually just recently had the pleasure of meeting Mindset Mike. He's a wrestling sports psychologist, but getting into MMA, absolutely amazing guy. So bringing him into the field with some of our athletes and sitting everybody down allows us to get the best result for these different camps and feel as individualized as possible.
That's cool. And for me, not really being involved in the sport of MMA, wrestling in general, I know that, in our sport, we've got a lot of knuckleheads.
Yes.
And certainly, do you ever run into, whether it be, coaches or fighters that kind of brush off the science and the things that you do and want to just go and just grind themselves into a wall? And how do you kind of feel those conversations as far as like, listen, this will help you?
A lot of it's a give and take, right? It's in order for you to make an impact on the person in front of you as the coach, you got to know that it's not about you anymore. It's about the athlete in front of you. If they feel more comfortable working hard, like needlessly hard, then you have to scale them back gently, not rapidly. Think about, almost like, it sounds terrible to say, I'm not comparing overtraining to alcoholism, but think about what you have to do with addiction, right? You don't just go cold turkey right out the gate. That could be extremely detrimental to overall growth. You have to grade it out. It's the exact same conversation where we have to take small incremental steps to get them from, hey, they're on the verge of rhabdo, which is just complete general overtraining that's causing you to pee blood, all the way to, hey, we're hitting that good threshold where we might be overtraining a little bit, which is okay, but we're also not undertraining. Because that's another thing that I see is I recommend, hey, we need to train smarter, not harder. And then nobody ever hits 100% again. They always stay at like 80. So it's finding that good middle ground of, if we drop it incrementally versus going from, hey, we're overtraining to, hey, we're undertraining, we have better results.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I always found that interesting because obviously, again, comparing apples to oranges, but even myself in college, when a dietitian comes and talks to us, or, even a chiropractor comes and talks to us, I'm like, hey, whatever, I got to lose the weight. I got to go work out. And now, being a coach and seeing kids burn out and seeing them just mindlessly do things without any rhyme or reason, starts to, annoy myself with myself from the past. And I just wondered if you encounter that too with.
For sure. Well, for sure. And I also feel as though I'm uniquely lucky that I'm the same age, if not younger, than the people that I'm coaching. Right. I'm so young as a coach and so new as a coach. But when I can talk on their level, I always tell them, like, I'm way closer to an athlete than I am a doctor. Like, please, like, you can, cool, whatever, but just call me Austin. Yeah. And that allows me that immediate buy-in where I can talk in athlete terms. Mm-hmm. So many people that try to get people out of overtraining talk in science terms, when in reality, the only way to talk to that person, the only way to get them to understand what you're saying is to talk to them on their terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So obviously you're very intertwined into not only the competition side, but the healthcare side, the preparation side. I want to kind of shift gears here and talk about your other endeavors, as far as not only the Building a Fighter podcast, which, like I said, I'll link below to all of the different platforms that you guys have on there. But also the performance side that you have with Building a Fighter, especially with the involvement of one of my other best friends in the world, Alex Friedman, who is a partner in this with you. Talk about Building a Fighter.
I can do that. So Building a Fighter, it started as just a podcast that me and Alex were doing. And actually it started after we did somebody else's podcast. So we jumped on.
And hold on right there. Part of the reason why Cal and I started a podcast, we saw that you guys were able to do it well, and we thought that it looked fun. So that was part of the genesis of this as well. I'm sorry. Keep going.
No, you're good, dude. And it is a blast, right? So it started after me and Alex got asked to co-host on the Clinically Pressed podcast from Joel Ludke, who was all of our head athletic trainer back at UW Lacrosse. And me and Alex were already having these conversations already. We were calling each other, talking about it, because he was at the UFC Performance Institute at the time. And at the time of us thinking about this. And then I was just getting into my practice. We're already having these talks. We do that podcast. We're like, well, why don't we just do more of this? We're already having these talks. Why don't we just record it? And that's how it started. And it's a blast, right? Sorry, I got to burp.
I've burped like 3 times already.
I know. But so with that, and that kind of blossomed into, I think we're at 76 episodes now. So about a year and a half in. And we've had some awesome interviews where about half of the time, or about 3/4 of the time, it's me and Alex talking about different topics. But we've been getting some different guests on too, where we have Bo Sandoval, the head of performance at the UFC PI. We have Tara Giroux. She's the sports medicine manager at the UFC PI. She's the sports chiro there. We just had on last weekend, it would have been Kamaru Usman, Justin Gaethje, Rose, Alistair Overeems, all the team elevation strength coaches, where we did almost like a round table. Mm-hmm. Then we've had on Christina Chu, who's one of the top sports, like rising stars in the sports dietetic world. So it's been really, really cool to have. And of course, I can't forget Bobby Gaisford, who's the athletic trainer at the PI. Those are our main guests. But having all those people on, it's allowed me to reshape some of my opinions in sports medicine or in strength and conditioning based around the combat at sports athlete. So it's the main goal. If I had to give like the talk about what Building a Fighter is we're trying to elevate the support side of combat sports, because every other sport has it. Why doesn't what we think is the best sport in the world? Mm-hmm. With that, we also do strength and conditioning. We offer online programs. The thing that I say to people is that we have individualized or team programs. So if you're in Bufu, Oklahoma, you don't have access to top tier strength coach, but you got an EOS or like a Gold's Gym in your town. Well, guess what? We can make an individualized program for you that we're doing the same thing that we're doing for our top tier athletes that we're seeing in person. Mm-hmm. And we have videos and different programs set up to get you as strong as possible without having to be in a big city. Mm-hmm. So we have team programs, individual programs, as well as different like healthcare based programs. So say you have a history of back pain, you want to strengthen that low back so it doesn't hurt more. Guess what? That's on there as well with video tutorials.
That is super awesome. It's especially, I always applaud you and Alex for kind of really taking advantage of combining different mediums at your disposal, right? You've taken into the podcast world, you've understood social media. And well, like I said, I keep talking about this, but you guys have an overactive Instagram account that's building a fighter with different videos and clips of your podcast and everything, and marketing yourself social media wise, getting your content out to people who use your service, especially when they don't need, like you said, anybody there. Like, you are their strength and conditioning coaches. I know you and I have had conversations about too the usability of building a fighter in schools that don't have the resources to fund, a fully active strength and conditioning coach, which is like 90% of schools, right?
Exactly.
Usually it's just, a PE teacher that, hasn't done these things for 30 years since they were in college, or it's each coach of each sport trying to, come up with what they think is a good strength and conditioning program, which in our sport, wrestling coaches that think they know strength and conditioning without actually ever being educated in strength and conditioning is almost more detrimental to performance than it is beneficial.
Right.
I look back on, none of necessarily the coaches that I've had, but, stories that I've heard of where people are just doing mindless things like running with 2 plates over their heads and handing them off because it makes you tougher and also stronger and also builds cardio at the same, like, it's absolutely ridiculous. So I really like that you guys are pushing towards kind of spreading that message of concrete, science-based, peer-reviewed, effective training methods, which I think is super cool.
Well, yeah, and that's the main thing, right? Is we get into the service industry, which is what building a fighter really is in, to serve, right? That's why it's called the service industry. So we tried to figure out what's the best way that we can help as many people as possible. And that's just kind of what we came up with, where if we're not in person, we can still make a big impact on these athletes that otherwise would be doing exactly what you said, exactly what I've done in the past.
Yep.
Oh, we're going to get tougher today. We're going to run around the track with a 45-pound weight above our head. When that's, you want to know the recipe to overtraining? You want to know why I have to talk with all the wrestlers about overtraining? That's that stupid shit right there.
Yeah. I'm almost waiting until you guys, I'm waiting for the promotional announcement of when you guys host the Building a Fighter fight night. I assume that's where we're leading, is because you guys are absorbing every portion of the fight game. And I think the only next logical step is to start hosting fight nights.
Well, maybe in the future. No, what it's leading to is the main goal of building a fighter is going to be to create an education platform. Because, like I said, what are we trying to do? We're trying to help as many combat athletes as possible. What's the best way to enact that cause? What's the best way to make that as good as possible? Well, it's to influence the influencers. So if we can talk to people like me, like chiropractors, sports chiropractors, physical therapists, athletic trainers, strength coaches, skill coaches, because skill coaches never have to get CEUs. They think their way is always right, when in reality, everybody can learn. Dietitians, but having everybody in that one central location and have a course based around how everybody can best benefit the athlete in front of them, I think that's going to be where building a fighter ends up taking off. Because if you, me, the strength coach, and the dietitian can all speak the same language, talk about the same things, and not have our egos get in the way and say my way's right. No, my way's right. And we understand where we fit into the combat sports paradigm. Well, guess what? That's how we elevate combat sports as a whole. That's how we lift the floor, which is what we always talk about, not just raise the ceiling.
It's interesting to hear you talk about these things, because I do think that is somewhere that's a niche that hasn't been filled, not only in combat sports, but I think in a lot of sports in general. I think you find that clashing of egos and my way's the right way whenever you get an athlete that's got, multiple professionals in their, call it what you want. We call it a team in MMA, but, surrounding any really serious pro or even collegiate athletes. I think getting everybody on the same page is one major thing that a lot of athletes lack in general, is the team that supports them, all kind of working one-minded.
Exactly. I tell everybody, like, if I'm a coach, my goal isn't to be Luke Skywalker. My goal is to be Yoda. As soon as I try to become Luke Skywalker, I have done a detriment to the athlete in front of me.
I like that. I like that line of thinking, and I like the athlete forward mentality of literally building a fighter. Like, and not only like you always talk about how it started off as a podcast. I half don't believe you because you came up with such a good name that then when you started stacking all of these other things on, you didn't even have to change the name. So I call a little bit of bullshit on that. It just started as a podcast because it all has come together so well as far as the different pieces that you're putting together.
I mean, there was still a plan, you know. I'm always thinking long term because building is a pretty good prefix.
True. You can kind of fit anything under that umbrella.
Yeah.
Also, to people who have never heard of your podcast, I listen to it all the time. I will admit that I usually binge them. I usually won't listen for 4 weeks and then listen for 3 hours at a time. But me being an anat and phys teacher in high school, I certainly don't understand. I don't have an understanding of the human body like you and Alex do with your master's degrees in your different areas. But it's fun for me to listen because with a bachelor's degree in biology and being a human anat and phys teacher, I can understand a lot of the things that you're saying. And so it's nice for me because I feel like just by listening to you, I can start to employ some of those different things in my athletes training as well. And you also mix a good, you have those complex conversations that I do think that if, a random person just tuned in, they might be a little confused, but you do such a good job of breaking those complex things down into understandable ways. And the guests that you have on your show also are very well spoken and understand how to communicate the topics that they are talking about in the section of those episodes. And I think I tell my kids all the time, I think the worst thing that science has going for it is that science is almost an exclusive language spoken only by scientists. And there's a very, very hard barrier of entry for someone who doesn't understand the science to then learn the science. For
sure. Well, and that honestly boils down to something that I always think about. It was a quote. I don't remember who said it. You're my Jamie on this podcast, so pull that shit up, Jamie. But it's a quote that anybody can make something sound complex. Mm-hmm. A true expert is somebody that can make the complex sound simple. And that's what I try to live my life by is as I have to, that's my job every day. Like if I had to tell people what's the number one thing I do, it's I'm the one that tries to allow the athletes to understand all of this, the difficult things going on in their body. I need to be able to break down a complex healthcare situation to a high school football player and tell it in their terms, not in terms that are going to scare them.
Yeah. And I think too, making a personal connection in my life, as you and I both, growing up in the sport of wrestling, and I'm sure as you got into high school, you were helping out with club stuff, as far as the kids club that you were involved with, the Gomez Wrestling Academy, and even in college when you and I would go to the local Ironworks Wrestling Club, or working with the Holman kids, or working with the Galesville kids, or learning how to teach wrestling for me was such a big reason as to why I find success in the classroom as a high school science teacher, because it's literally like, you can't just walk into a wrestling practice with 12-year-old kids, do some wicked move and say, there you go. Like you got it. Like you got to break it down into its most basic points and then build them up so that eventually they will get there. And I think not only does that work well and translate well into a high school class, but it also works well, I would imagine, in explaining to these fighters why they should understand what's really going on in the end goal of all of these different scientific methods of training.
Well, for sure. And it allows you to break it down for them in practice too, right? It allows me to have a unique lens in wrestling for MMA, where when I break something down, I do use an anatomic words, right? I do use anatomy, but I try to do it in a way that they can understand the biomechanics of their body. Say we're doing cage wrestling, for example, and we have an underhook. Typically for an underhook to work on the cage, we got to also pin the other side of their body with some sort of staple. If I just say, hey, stay tight to them, is that really going to help me in any way, shape, or form? Or are they just
different things?
Exactly. Or I could say, like, hey, I need you, like what I do is I actually use kinesthetic cues. I can move them to good biomechanical position, and then I figure out what post they need. It takes 2 more minutes on the front end, but say I was able to get them to a elbow staple onto the bicep. They have an underhook on the near side and their head is now on the far side. Well, guess what? The dude in front of you, can I swear in this podcast?
Absolutely. My students watch, but that's funny. I don't care.
Perfect.
I've already sworn like twice.
Say we get an underhook, we have an elbow staple, and our head's on the far side. This is something that we were working with Mark Madsen. He's an Olympic silver medalist. It's something that he showed me, and we were able to work through. That dude in front of you is fucked, absolutely fucked, because he no longer can move to the right or to the left. His lower body is stapled. And as long as I have a good shoulder pry, as long as I'm pushing in at about a 45 to 70 degree angle, that keeps him pinned to the wall, elevated. And now I can just start throwing knees and just berating his legs with my legs, right? And understanding the biomechanics of that allows me to then break it down for the athlete in front of me in non-biomechanical terms. And then we can implement it in their game plan moving forward.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to pick your brain and talk about the science of fighting. And I truly think that we could talk about this probably for another hour and a half. However, with season 2 of the Casual Combat Podcast, we have made it a point to keep these episodes under 40 minutes. And I think we are approaching like minute 39 right now. So I think definitely our talks here today call for a second episode and a second appearance sometime later on.
Let's go.
But I think we're going to have to call it here today. So for those of you that stuck with us for this long, check out Austin and Alex on the Building a Fighter podcast. You can find that on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere Spotify, you find Apple podcasts. Yeah, absolutely. You will be able to look into some of our other podcasts if you go to our website, casualcombatmma.com. Check us out on Twitter. We're on YouTube. This video podcast will serve as hopefully a preview for some of our other video podcasts. And we've also got articles up on our website as well. And like I said, check them out. Thank you guys so much, and we will see you next week.